It was supposed to be the perfect weekend getaway. Just what we needed to escape the grind of everyday life. A quiet retreat in the scenic beauty of Hawaii, far away from the noise and stress of the city. My friends and I had been craving something like this for a while. A break to relax, explore, and recharge. After a brief search, we stumbled upon a recommendation from a local, the Kalani Bay Hotel. The place seemed like a hidden gem, not too far from the hustle of Waikiki, but far enough to offer peace and seclusion. It's cozy, and it's not a typical tourist trap, the local had said. It's quiet. The views are incredible. We were sold. The plan was simple. Book a couple of nights, enjoy the serenity of the place, and unwind by the ocean. No rush, no itinerary, just us and the sea. Little did we know, what awaited us at Kalani Bay Hotel was something none of us could have ever expected. As we approached the hotel, the first thing that struck us was the silence. The air was thick with humidity, but there was something strangely still about it, as though the ocean itself had paused for a moment. The hotel stood at the edge of a cliff, overlooking a vast stretch of blue water. The view was breathtaking, endless ocean meeting the sky in a perfect line, the waves gently crashing against the rocks below, a serene yet powerful reminder of nature's beauty. But despite the stunning setting, there was something unsettling about the place. It had a kind of age to it, like the hotel had been frozen in time. The Kalani Bay Hotel looked ancient. As we parked and stepped out of the car, I couldn't help but notice the way the hotel seemed to sag beneath the weight of its own history. The building was made of dark wood, weathered by the salty air, and the large windows were covered in a layer of dust, like no one had bothered to clean them in years. The paint was chipped, the edges of the roof curled in places, and the brickwork around the base had cracked, with vines creeping up the walls like they were trying to reclaim the space. The air smelled of salt water mixed with something else, a musty, earthy odor, as if the ocean breeze was bringing in a hidden secret. It was a smell that made you feel like you were stepping into something old, something forgotten. The wooden floors creaked underfoot as we walked inside. The walls lined with old paintings, their colors faded with time, their frames scratched and chipped. The hotel had character, that much was clear, but it also had a weight to it, an old, death, creaking building, perched right on the edge of the world, like it had been there for centuries, waiting for something or someone to come along. Still, I was determined to enjoy this weekend, despite the odd feeling creeping up on me. I glanced at my friends, but they didn't seem bothered by the hotel's strange atmosphere. They were too busy oohing and aahing over the view, taking photos of the surrounding cliffs, and talking about how great it was going to be to finally relax. It was hard to argue with them. After all, the beauty of the surroundings was undeniable. The crashing waves, the jagged rocks, and the endless horizon all made it hard to think of anything else. We walked through the lobby, past the antique furniture that lined the walls, and toward the front desk. An elderly man sat behind the counter, his face a study in stoicism. He didn't smile or greet us with any warmth, just a nod as we approached. His eyes, though, were sharp, almost piercing, as though he were trying to read us in a way that made me feel a little uneasy. "Welcome to Kalani Bay," he said, his voice low and steady, but without any emotion. He handed us a set of heavy, old-fashioned brass keys. "I hope you enjoy your stay." His words were polite, but there was something about the way he said them that didn't sit right with me. It was as if the hotel had seen so many guests come and go, yet he remained unmoved by any of it. I could almost sense that he was guarding a secret, one that he would never share, no matter how much we asked. We accepted the keys and headed up the stairs toward our rooms, passing by old portraits that seemed to watch us as we moved through the building. The hotel felt empty, though, not even staff wandering around. It felt deserted. The silence was unnerving. It wasn't the peaceful, serene quiet you would expect in a place like this. It was something more oppressive, as if the hotel itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I looked over at my friends, trying to gauge if they were noticing the same thing, but they seemed oblivious to it all. They were too caught up in the idea of finally being away from everything. One of them joked about how we had the whole place to ourselves, which should have been a good thing, but I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me. As we made our way to the rooms, the heavy wooden doors groaned as we opened them, and a sudden gust of wind rattled the window panes. We stepped inside, and I was instantly struck by the old-world charm of the rooms. The furniture was dated, but in a way that felt like it belonged. The beds were large and covered in thick, worn quilts, and the floor was covered in faded rugs that gave the space a... But there was something off about the room. Something subtle, just beneath the surface. The air felt heavier here too, like it had absorbed years of memories, of lives that had passed through these rooms, and now it was holding them in place. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I wasn't alone. The silence in the room felt more alive than the quiet outside. It was as if the room itself was watching me, listening to every movement, every breath. I pushed the thought aside and went to unpack, trying to focus on the task at hand. After all, we were here to relax, to enjoy the peace and beauty of the island. But as I unpacked, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing just behind me. I turned quickly, but the room was empty, just as it had been when I entered. Still, I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just the stress of traveling catching up with me. We all gathered for a quick drink in the lobby later that evening, and I asked the others if they had felt the same unease. They shrugged it off, saying it was probably the old building, or maybe the isolation of being so far from everything else. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. There was something about the Kalani Bay Hotel, something in the air, something in the way the old walls seemed to breathe with time. Something in the silence that didn't feel comforting, but suffocating. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had walked into a place that was hiding something from us. Something dark and ancient that we were never meant to uncover. And yet, we stayed. After all, it was just a hotel, right? What could possibly go wrong? That night, after we had settled into our rooms and unpacked, we gathered ourselves for dinner in the hotel's dining room. The place felt vast and eerily quiet, much larger than it should have been for such a small group of guests. It was clear that the Kalani Bay Hotel wasn't busy. No bustling crowd, no chatter, no laughter, only us, the strangers who had wandered into this strange place. We walked into the dining room, where the long wooden table stretched across the room like an altar, as if it were waiting for something, someone. The ceilings were high, with faded chandeliers hanging like forgotten relics from a time long past. The only sound that filled the space was the soft hum of the ceiling fans spinning lazily overhead. The air inside was cool, but it was the kind of coolness that felt unsettling. It wasn't refreshing like a breeze you'd expect by the ocean. Instead, it felt as if the room itself was exhaling a cold breath, one that sent a slight shiver down my spine. I glanced around at the others, but they didn't seem bothered by it. My friends were too caught up in the excitement of the weekend to notice. They sat down at the table, filling their glasses and chatting about what they wanted to do the next day. I tried to get into the spirit of things too, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The food was good, at least. The meal was simple: grilled fish, some rice, and vegetables. But there was something strange about the taste, something almost metallic or stale, as if the flavors had been locked away for far too long. My stomach churned, but I didn't say anything. After all, it was probably just the odd ambiance of the hotel affecting my perception. The room was so large, and the silence was so heavy, it made even the most mundane activities feel unnatural. We ate quickly, as if we were trying to finish the meal before something could catch our attention. But it wasn't the food that kept my focus. It was the feeling of being watched. We continued eating, the clinking of silverware the only noise, as the wind outside began to pick up. The soft, rhythmic sound of the ocean's waves crashing against the rocks below was now accompanied by a low, eerie howl that seemed to seep through the cracks in the walls. I couldn't help but notice how the wind seemed to grow stronger as the evening progressed. It howled around the building, making the windows rattle in their frames. It sounded like something was trying to get in. We laughed nervously at the oddness of the night, trying to dismiss the chill that was settling in the room. But there was an uncomfortable tension in the air, a heaviness that none of us could ignore. As the night deepened, we excused ourselves from the dining room and made our way back to our rooms. The lobby was quieter than before, if that was even possible. The elderly manager had disappeared, leaving the space empty and cold. The hallway to our rooms felt even more oppressive than it had earlier. Darker, more confined, as we passed by the old portraits hanging on the walls. I had the unsettling feeling that the eyes in the paintings were following us. But I didn't mention it to my friends. They were too busy joking and chatting, unaware of the weight that seemed to press down on me with every step. By the time we reached our rooms, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I quickly excused myself and closed the door behind me, locking it with a click that echoed through the room. The bed was large and inviting, the thick quilt neatly folded at the foot. I tried to ignore the creeping sense of discomfort and climbed into bed, hoping that sleep would come quickly and put an end to the strange tension I was feeling. But sleep didn't come. I lay in bed, wide awake, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the soft sounds of the hotel around me. The wind continued to howl outside, and the occasional creak of the old building settling made my heart jump in my chest. Every now and then, I thought I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, the kind of heavy steps that didn't belong in a place that should have been quiet. At first, I thought it was just the sound of the building shifting, the wind playing tricks on my mind. But then I heard them again, closer this time. They were coming from just outside my door, like someone was pacing back and forth in the hallway. I sat up in bed, straining my ears to listen, but the footsteps stopped as suddenly as they had started. I held my breath, waiting, but there was nothing, just the sound of the wind. I opened the door to check, my heart pounding in my chest. But the hallway was empty. It was just the same dimly lit corridor, with the old wallpaper peeling off the walls and the occasional flickering light bulb overhead. No one was there. I closed the door slowly, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Just the weird acoustics of the hotel, the wind playing tricks on me. But something inside me told me it wasn't nothing. I lay back down, trying to shake the feeling, but sleep still wouldn't come. I kept my eyes closed, pretending that if I didn't acknowledge the fear, it would go away. But every few minutes, I heard it again, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps outside my door. I was too afraid to get up and look again, but I couldn't ignore it. It felt real. It felt too real. I turned over and buried my face in the pillow, trying to block out the sound, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. Then it came. A soft whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. It was as if it was coming from somewhere deep within the hotel, from the walls themselves. It was a voice, low, almost too soft to hear, but I could make out a few words, a name, my name. It echoed through the silence of the room, bouncing off the walls like it was everywhere at once. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to call out to my friends, but I couldn't move. The whisper continued, soft and insistent, calling my name over and over again. My name. And then it stopped. The room fell silent again, and for a moment, I thought I had imagined it. But I knew I hadn't. I slowly sat up, my heart still racing. The room felt colder now, the silence almost suffocating. I glanced at the door again, but this time, I didn't move. I was too afraid. I could still hear the waves crashing against the rocks below, but the comforting sound now felt distant, as if it were coming from another world altogether. It was as if the ocean itself. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence, each second stretching out longer than the last. I tried to tell myself that it was all in my head, that I was just being irrational. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Something in this hotel, in this place, was alive in a way that I couldn't explain. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the building settling. It was something else. Something older. Something far more sinister. I lay back down, pulling the covers up tightly around me. But I couldn't sleep. Not anymore. The hotel had already claimed me, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could fight the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, after a restless night spent in the oppressive quiet of the hotel, we decided to venture out and explore. The strange events of the night before still lingered in the back of my mind, but I tried to push them aside. After all, we were supposed to be here to enjoy ourselves, right? The beauty of the ocean, the fresh air, the promise of a peaceful getaway. These things should have been enough to calm my nerves. But somehow, everything felt off, as though the hotel itself was holding something back. Something that didn't want to be discovered. We wandered through the hotel, our footsteps echoing in the vast, empty hallways. The place was huge, much bigger than it appeared from the outside, and it seemed like there were endless corridors leading to rooms that seemed to stretch on forever. As we walked, I couldn't help but notice the state of disrepair the hotel was in. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, faded to the point where it was hard to tell what color it had once been. The air smelled stale, and the floorboards creaked under our feet, groaning with the weight of years of neglect. The The furniture in the hallways was old, ancient even. Chairs that looked like they had been abandoned long ago, tables with cracked surfaces, and lamps that seemed frozen in time. It was as though the hotel had once been a beautiful place filled with guests and laughter, but now it had become a forgotten relic of the past, left to decay in silence. We passed room after room, each one more eerie than the last. The doors were all slightly ajar, as if someone had been in and out recently. But there were no signs of life. The rooms themselves were cold, the curtains drawn tight, blocking out the light. It was like walking through a mausoleum, a place where memories had been left behind, never to be remembered again. Then, at the very end of the hallway, we found it. A door that didn't belong. It was different from the others. There was no number on it, no sign that it was a guest room. The wood was old, but not worn in the same way as the other doors. It looked like it had been untouched for years. The handle was made of faded brass, its edges worn down from time. But there was something about it that drew me in. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to approach it. The others noticed too. We stood in front of the door for a moment, staring at it, as if waiting for something to happen. The silence of the hotel seemed to deepen around us, as though the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for us to make the next move. After a moment of hesitation, curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to open the door. It was locked. We tried the handle, then pushed against the door, but it wouldn't budge. The strange, sudden urge to find out what was behind that door grew stronger. The others were just as curious, and we agreed that we needed to get inside. The door seemed to call to us, as if it was waiting for us to unlock it. We went back downstairs to the lobby, hoping to find something, anything, that might help us get in. We searched around the counter, looked through drawers, and scanned the old keys hanging on the wall. After what felt like an eternity, we found it. A single key hidden in the back of a dusty drawer, forgotten and covered in cobwebs. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, and yet there was something oddly significant about it. It was old, ornate, with a brass head that matched the handle of the door. We rushed back up to the hallway, and I could feel my heart beating faster with every step. The air felt thicker now, heavier, as if the building was beginning to react to what we were doing. We inserted the key into the lock, and with a slow, grinding sound, the door creaked open. What we found inside was unlike any other room in the hotel. The room was cold, the air thick with the scent of dust and something else. Something metallic, like the smell of old iron. The furniture inside was sparse, as if it had been left in a hurry. There was an old bed with tattered sheets, the fabric faded and frayed at the edges. The frame was made of dark wood, its once polished surface now chipped and worn. A dresser stood against one wall, its drawers slightly ajar. But the real oddity was the large mirror that hung above it. It seemed to flicker in the dim light, as if it was somehow alive, its surface shimmering unnaturally, casting strange reflections. But the most unsettling thing of all was the portrait that hung above the bed. The painting was large, and the woman in it stared down at us with eyes that seemed too lifelike, too real. She had long, flowing hair, and her face was pale, almost ghostly, her lips painted in a deep shade of red. But it wasn't her appearance that disturbed me. It was her eyes. They were haunting, the kind of eyes that seemed to follow you, no matter where you moved. They were dark, almost black, and there was something familiar about them, something I couldn't quite place. I stared at the woman's face for a long time, unable to tear my gaze away. It was as if she was calling to me, as though she wanted to tell me something. I glanced around at my friends, but they were equally transfixed by the portrait, their eyes wide as they tried to make sense of what they were seeing. As we stood there, the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. It was like someone had turned a switch, and the coldness seeped into our bones, making us shiver despite the warmth outside. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I felt a deep, creeping dread settling in. The room felt wrong. It felt alive. Then, as if the room itself had been holding its breath, the door slammed shut behind us with a loud bang. We jumped, startled by the noise, and turned toward the door. But it was too late to run. The air had become thick with tension, the kind of oppressive weight that presses down on you until you can hardly breathe. Whispers filled the room, low and guttural, like a distant chant. They echoed off the walls, curling around us like invisible hands. The voice was faint at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, closer, until it was all around us. It was hard to make out the words, but they seemed to be in a language I didn't recognize. The whispers became frantic, almost pleading, and I felt my stomach churn in fear. We rushed toward the door, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't open. It was as if the room had sealed itself off from the rest of the hotel, trapping us inside. Panic set in, and we tried to push against the door to break free, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering continued, louder now, almost as if the voices were laughing at us. And then, as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The whispers faded, the air warmed again, and the door creaked open. We didn't wait another second. We stumbled out of the room, gasping for breath, our hearts racing in our chests. As we stood there in the hallway, trying to calm down, I couldn't shake the image of the woman's face from my mind, as if she were watching, waiting, And I knew, deep down, that the hotel's secrets were far darker than we could have ever imagined. That night, the air in the hotel felt denser than before, thick with an oppressive quiet that seemed to settle over everything. The building, with its creaky floors and old, groaning walls, had always had a kind of unsettling presence. But tonight, that feeling was more intense. It wasn't just the physical silence either. It was something deeper, something that seemed to resonate within the very bones of the hotel. Every step I took felt heavy, like I was walking through a place that didn't want me there. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched unnaturally long, creeping along the walls and the ceiling like they were trying to reach out and touch us. We had all agreed that night to stay together in one room. The tension that had been building up all day was too much to ignore. The strange occurrences, the eerie whispers, the cold drafts that seemed to come from nowhere. None of us felt comfortable being alone anymore. There was a sense of urgency in the way we moved around, as if something unseen was watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake. The wind outside howled, a low, mournful sound that seemed to rattle the windows and shake the walls. It was louder than before, almost deafening, like the storm was right on top of us. We huddled together in the dimly lit room, trying to shake off the feeling that something was closing in around us. The room itself was larger than I remembered. The walls were lined with old wallpaper, its edges curling away like it was slowly being eaten by time. The furniture was sparse, simple. Just a few chairs, a small table, and the bed, of course. The bed was large, its wooden frame dark and worn with age. We sat there in silence, the flickering light from the lamp casting long shadows that seemed to stretch across the room. The only sound was the wind outside and the occasional creak of the building as it settled under the pressure of the storm. It felt like we were trapped in this space, held in place by something far older than any of us. And then, just as I thought I might scream from the sheer intensity of the silence, we saw them. At first, the figures were barely visible, just faint shapes moving in the shadows. They flickered like mirages, barely registering in the corner of my vision. But as I focused, trying to understand what I was seeing, they became clearer. I could make out the outlines of people, human shapes, standing still, watching us. They weren't just reflections or illusions. They were real. But they were wrong. The figures didn't belong in the room. They were faint, almost translucent, like they were trapped between worlds. I could see their features now, pale faces, hollow eyes that stared at us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. They didn't move, didn't speak. They just stood there, staring. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to grow darker around them, pulling the light away until all I could see were their shapes, barely discernible, but unmistakable. One of them, a man, stepped forward slowly, his feet barely making a sound on the floor. His face was gaunt, his features sharp, and his eyes, those eyes, were full of something that I couldn't place. It was like he wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Slowly, he reached out toward us, his hand trembling as though it were trying to touch the edge of reality itself. But before any of us could move, he, along with the others, disappeared into thin air. One moment, they were there, and the next, they were gone. The room felt colder still, the emptiness in their absence pressing down on us. We sat there, our hearts racing, our minds struggling to make sense of what had just happened. For a long moment, no one said anything. We were all too stunned to speak, too frightened to even breathe. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a figment of our imagination. What we had seen was real, undeniable. There were ghosts in this hotel, and we had just come face to face with them. We gathered what little courage we had left and made our way to the front desk, our footsteps echoing loudly in the empty hallway. The hotel felt even quieter now, if that was possible. The manager, the same elderly man who had checked us in, was sitting behind the counter. He looked up as we approached, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he knew what was coming. "Do you know what's going on in this hotel?" I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. "What was that? Who were those people?" He hesitated for a moment, his gaze shifting away from us, as though he was considering whether or not he should speak. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "This hotel." His voice was low, almost reluctant, as though the words were hard for him to say. "It was built over old land that's been here for centuries. It's not just the sea that's been here a long time. There are spirits, lost souls who never left. They linger." His words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. I felt my stomach tighten as I tried to process what he was saying. Spirits, lost souls, it didn't make sense. But then again, nothing about this place had made sense since we arrived. "They're trapped here," the manager continued, his eyes distant, as though he were seeing something far beyond the walls of the lobby. "The land, it has a way of holding on to things. People who die here don't always move on. Some are too tied to the place, and some," he paused, as though searching for the right words, "some never knew they were dead." The silence in the lobby was deafening. I glanced over at my friends, who were staring at the manager in shock. The weight of his words sank in, and I felt the coldness of the room seep deeper into my bones. We weren't just guests at this hotel. We were intruders in a place where the past had never truly let go. The souls of the lost were still here, wandering the halls, waiting for something or someone to set them free. "I don't know why they're showing themselves to you now," the manager said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you should leave. This place isn't meant for people like you. It never was." His warning hung in the air, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. But we couldn't leave. Not yet. We had to understand what was happening, what we had stumbled into. We had to know more. As we turned to leave the lobby, I looked back one last time at the manager. He was staring after us, his face unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a sadness, a deep sorrow, as though he knew that what we had seen was only the beginning. We didn't speak as we made our way back to our rooms. The hotel felt different now, darker, as if it were alive and aware of our presence. The wind howled outside, louder than ever, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist, as though they were moving of their own accord. We knew now that the hotel's secrets were far deeper, far more dangerous than we could have ever imagined. And as we stood there in the hallway, the sound of the whispers from the room we had left behind seemed to echo through the air, growing louder with every passing second. The ghosts of Kalani Bay weren't just memories. They were alive, and they were waiting for us. We tried to leave, but the doors wouldn't open. We pulled at the handles, pushed and shoved, but nothing worked. The doors, heavy, ancient wooden doors, refused to budge, as though something far stronger in the mere mechanisms of the locks was holding them shut. Panic began to rise in our chests as we realized that the hotel wasn't just some crumbling, forgotten place. It had trapped us inside. The oppressive silence that had plagued the halls seemed to grow louder now, echoing in my ears as I turned back toward the interior of the building. We made our way to the windows, hoping to find another way out. But the glass wouldn't move, no matter how hard we pressed our hands against it. It was as if the windows themselves had sealed shut, their frames frozen in place, unable to open, unable to let us escape. A chill crawled up my spine as the realization set in. We were stuck. The hotel wasn't just holding us, it was keeping us here. The feeling of being trapped inside the walls of a building that had so clearly forgotten its purpose. A building that was so very much alive in its own twisted way was suffocating. With a growing sense of desperation, we began to walk the hallways, hoping to find something, anything, that would lead us out. But no matter which direction we took, the hallways stretched on endlessly, looping back to where we had started. We'd pass familiar doors, the same peeling wallpaper, the same creaky floorboards, and it was as if we were moving in circles, as though the hotel itself was changing, bending, warping, making sure we could never leave. Every turn we took seemed to lead us back to the same place, trapping us in an endless loop of repetition. We weren't going anywhere. We were just walking in circles, getting lost in a maze of rooms and hallways that had no end. The hotel had become a prison, and there was no way out. Hours passed, and it seemed like time itself had become distorted inside the hotel. The once bright daylight had given way to the oppressive darkness of night, but it didn't feel like night. It felt like we were suspended in time, like the very concept of day and night had stopped having any meaning. The wind howled outside, its eerie wail creeping through the cracks in the walls. The storm outside raged against the hotel, but inside, the air was still, almost suffocating in its unnatural quiet. That was when we found it. In the room we had entered earlier, the one with the strange painting and the trapped spirits, we discovered an old journal hidden beneath the floorboards. The book had been tucked away in a dusty, forgotten corner, its pages yellowed with age, the cover faded and cracked. It wasn't much more than a relic from a time long past, a relic that had been deliberately hidden, as though someone wanted to keep its contents buried forever. But something about it called to us, and we couldn't resist. We pried it free from its hiding place and opened the journal, unsure of what we might find. As we flipped through the pages, we discovered that the journal belonged to a woman named Lanny, the same name as the hotel. The first few pages were filled with her neat, elegant handwriting, telling the story of her life and the things she had loved. Lanny spoke of the hotel, of how it had once been a beautiful place, a haven by the sea, a refuge for travelers and tourists who sought peace and beauty in the quiet corners of Hawaii. She described the sounds of the waves crashing against the rocks, the scent of the salt water on the breeze, the vibrant sunsets that lit the sky on fire every evening. But as we read on, her writing began to change. It became darker, more erratic, as though she were losing control of her thoughts. Lonnie spoke of a terrible tragedy that had occurred near the cliffs that the hotel stood upon, a shipwreck. The sea had claimed a vessel, a large ship that had been caught in a fierce storm, and it crashed against the jagged rocks beneath the cliffs. Lonnie had been there that day, standing on the shore, watching helplessly as the waves swallowed the ship whole. She had lost her family that day, her husband, her children, all of them. They were on the ship, caught in the storm, and Lonnie was left behind, watching as the waves claimed them all. She had been too late to save them. The more we read, the clearer it became that Lanny's grief had never truly ended. She had died in the same storm that claimed her family, her soul bound to the hotel, unable to leave. But it wasn't just Lanny. As we turned the pages, we learned that the hotel had been built on cursed land, land that had been stained by death long before the hotel's construction. The very waters that had taken Lanny's family were the same waters that had claimed countless others before her. Sailors, travelers, anyone who had ventured too close to the cliffs. Their souls, like Lanny's, had been trapped, unable to find peace or rest. And the hotel had been built right on top of this cursed ground, as though the land itself was alive with the memories of the dead, the ghosts of those who had drowned beneath the waves. The souls of the lost had been drawn to the hotel, bound to it by a curse they could never escape. As we read on, the truth became impossible to ignore. Lonnie's soul, along with the souls of those who had died in the storm, were trapped inside the hotel. They wandered the halls, lost, unable to move on, unable to leave the place where they had died. The hotel was a prison, and the spirits inside it were forever bound to its walls, doomed to remain there for eternity. The hotel itself had become a vessel for these trapped souls, a place where the dead could never find peace. The more we read, the more we realized that the hotel wasn't just haunted. It was cursed, built on land soaked in grief and death. And we had wandered right into its heart, into the very place where the lost souls of the past still lingered, waiting for someone, anyone, to break the curse and release them from their torment. But there was no... The journal ended abruptly, its last pages filled with frantic, desperate writing that made no sense, as if Lanny had been trying to explain something that could never be explained. Her handwriting grew more erratic, almost as if she were being driven mad by the weight of the truth. And then, on the very last page, there was one final sentence, written in all caps as though she had been shouting in her final moments. "The sea will never let you go." We closed the journal, and the room fell silent. The truth was laid bare before us. The hotel wasn't just a place that had been forgotten by time. It was a place that had been cursed from the very beginning. And now we were part of its dark history, trapped in the same way as the souls that had come before us. We had been drawn here, and now we would never leave. The hotel had claimed us, just as it had claimed everyone else who had dared to step into its haunted halls. As we stood there, holding the journal in our hands, the temperature in the room dropped, and the air grew thick with the presence of something unseen. I could feel it. Those lost souls, still wandering, still waiting for something to happen. The curse of Kalani Bay was alive, and we were caught in its grip. There was no escaping now. The sea would never let us go. By now, we had reached the breaking point. The oppressive atmosphere of the hotel had worn us down, and the feeling of being trapped was unbearable. We had tried everything to leave, pounding on the doors, tugging at the windows, and searching for any possible way to escape, but nothing worked. The hotel had locked us in, its invisible grip tightening with every passing hour. The whispers that had haunted us for days had grown louder, more insistent. The air around us was thick with them, curling into our ears, making it impossible to ignore. At night, the shadows seemed to come to life, creeping along the walls and stretching into every corner of our rooms. They moved as if they had a mind of their own. It felt as though the hotel itself was watching us, waiting for us to make the next move. It became clear to us that the only way out was to confront the spirits. We had to face the lost souls that roamed the halls, the ones that had been trapped here for so long. The fear of what might happen if we didn't was too great. We couldn't stay any longer, not in this suffocating, cursed place. We knew that we had to do something to release them, to break the hold that the hotel had on us. It was the only way to free ourselves from the nightmare we had stumbled into. In the dead of night, when the hotel was cloaked in complete darkness and silence, we made our decision. We gathered our courage, each of us knowing that this would be our only chance to escape. We had nothing left to lose. With trembling hands and racing hearts, we made our way to the forgotten rooms. The one we had found earlier. The room with the haunted painting of Lanny. The air around us felt even heavier now, like it was pressing down on us, forcing us to move slower, to hesitate. But we couldn't stop. We had no choice but to continue. When we reached the door, I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. The whispers were louder now, more frantic, almost desperate. It was as though the spirits in the hotel knew what we were about to do, and they were trying to stop us. But we pushed forward, determined to end the nightmare. The room was dark, but we could feel the weight of its history, its sorrow, pressing in on us. The temperature had dropped, and the chill in the air cut through our clothes, making our skin prickle. We stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath our feet, and the shadows seemed to grow longer, twisting and moving around us like living things. The painting of Lonnie, the one with her hollow eyes, still hung above the bed, its gaze following us, unwavering. I couldn't bring myself to look directly at it. There was something in her eyes that unsettled me, something that felt as though it were watching us, waiting for us to make our move. We stood there for a moment, gathering our thoughts. None of us spoke. The silence in the room was deafening, but it was the kind of silence that only deepened the sense of dread. We were not alone. The spirits, the souls of the lost, were with us. I could feel their presence, their sadness, their anger. Like, we knew what we had to do. We had to reach out to them, to call to them. We had to ask for forgiveness, for peace, for them to finally let go of the hotel and the land it stood on. I was terrified, but we couldn't back down now. The curse of the hotel had bound us to this place, and it wouldn't let us leave until we confronted the spirits and begged for their release. Together, we gathered in the center of the room, our voices trembling as we spoke. We called out to the spirits, to Lonnie, and to the others who had been lost in the storm. We begged for forgiveness, for their souls, for the suffering they had endured, for the curse that had bound them to this place. We asked for their peace, for their freedom, for the chance to leave this place and never return. Our words echoed in the room, reverberating off the walls, but there was no response at first. It felt as though the room had gone even colder, as if the spirits were listening but unwilling to answer. But then, slowly, something began to change. The temperature in the room started to rise. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a subtle shift, like a breeze stirring the air. But as we continued to speak, to call out to them, the warmth grew. The oppressive coldness that had filled the room began to dissipate. The shadows, which had once seemed alive, started to fade, retreating into the corners of the room, pulling away from us. It was as though the room itself was breathing again, as though the weight of the spirit's presence was lifting, and they were finally starting to move on. The whispers grew softer, quieter, until they were no longer there. The suffocating atmosphere that had plagued us for so long began to loosen. And for the first time since we had entered the hotel, I felt like we were truly alone, free from the oppressive weight of the spirit's despair. I didn't know if it was the spirits themselves, or if it was just the calm after the storm. But I knew that we had done something that had made a difference. And then, the door that had been locked for so long creaked open. It was subtle at first, like the faintest hint of movement, but it was enough. We could finally leave. The hotel, for the first time, was allowing us to go. The door that had kept us trapped for so long was now open to us, and we didn't hesitate. We rushed toward it, our hearts racing in our chests, our breath coming in shallow gasps. We stepped out into the hallway, and the hotel seemed to exhale a long, mournful sigh. The whispers had stopped. The shadows had faded. The hotel, once so alive with the presence of the lost souls, was now silent, still. We didn't look back. We couldn't. There was nothing left for us there. As we walked down the hallway toward the exit, I felt the weight of the hotel's history fall away. We had done it. We had freed the spirits, and in doing so, we had freed ourselves. The hotel that had once held us captive was now nothing more. The sun was rising when we finally left the hotel behind. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the first light of day breaking through the darkness. It felt like a rebirth, like we had stepped into a new world, one where the shadows no longer held sway. The air outside was fresh, the scent of the ocean carried on the breeze, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of relief. We never spoke of what had happened again. The memories of the hotel, of the spirits, of the painting of Lonnie were too much to bear. The experience had changed us all, and we carried the weight of it silently, each of us haunted by the image of Lonnie's eyes. staring at us from the painting, her gaze following us even as we left. We were lucky. We had managed to escape, to free ourselves from the curse of Kalani Bay Hotel. But I know that some aren't so fortunate. The hotel still stands, waiting for the next guests to enter. And if you ever find yourself there, walking through its long, silent halls, be careful. Don't look too closely into the shadows. You might just find a pair of eyes staring back at you.